it would help if I put on my correct mic. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the channel. We've got a celebrity guest, which is why I'm a little bit nervous. But here to help me is Lilith. Lilith, welcome. Good to see you again. And another. Yeah, another celebrity, since you're now part of Amarna's panel every week. I mean, but yeah. See. Okay, so yeah, our guest today, we're going to talk about a lot of things. We might ask him about slavery, because I don't think he's ever talked about slavery in the Bible, ever. But what I want to find out is whether or not he can ground ultimately instantiated possible impossibilities, because we don't know. Welcome to the show, Dr. Josh. I had to use that against you. I had to use that against you. for people who don't know, this is, well, it depends. It's kind of a running gag between you and the evil twins, Jay Patrick and Jefferson Spatchcock. And oh, you're muted. Sorry, my bad.
Just Dr.
Okay.
Josh?
So,
Peter.
Yeah,
I've been beatboxing the whole time. You know?
Yeah,
How did you do this to me?
And you did impressions and stuff. Yeah, it helps. It helps if you have the chat up. So, thank you, chat. As I said, I'm nervous having a celebrity like this on. So, yeah. So for people who don't get the joke of the ultimate instantial possible impossibility, whatever it is referring to a Christian apologist whose name we shall not name, but it's a running gag between you and Jefferson and Jay, the evil twins.
That's right.
Actually, I have a question for the chat. Since I brought wine to celebrate this illustrious occasion and this fantastic guest, should I drink every time they use word salad? Comment below.
We don't know. Okay, so Dr. Josh, I botched your intro, so there we go. Please tell the people who haven't heard of you before who you are and what you do.
I'm watching the view count. Yeah, I'm watching the view count as you put me up on this big screen here. The view count dropped like by 30, so I don't know what to tell you.
I very much doubt that.
Yeah, so I'm Joshua Bowen. I hang out with my wife on Digital Hammurabi, which is our YouTube channel. I spend probably more time on Twitter than anyone should, mostly dealing with Christian apologists who like to say things like slavery's okay, and how do you know that it's not? Which is just very odd to me in every case. But yeah, I have, I study ancient Near Eastern stuff and the Hebrew Bible. Got a couple of degrees in it. Wrote some stuff about it. So yeah, I do a lot of stuff online like this. So, and try to be funny every once in a while, but born without a brainstem, so that's sometimes problematic.
We seem to have that in common. And for the people who are going to criticize me in the chat, I'm going to beat them to it. Obviously, I didn't ask you to invite Megan on for this show, and there's a reason for that, because a couple of months ago, Jefferson Spatchcock, who I'm now producing the shows for, which I'm really looking forward to, he said he wanted to have you and Megan on his show, and so when you DM'd me, I thought it would be really bad taste if I was going to beat him to it. It's since I knew
you'll beat him to both of them.
Yes, I mean
you're both fantastic, and we all love your material. But
yes,
listen. I understand that people come to me to get to Megan. I get it. I've accepted it. You know what I mean?
Well, you're like the cute couple of the atheist / real biblical scholarship world. You know, the husband-wife duo, not the Rachel and Ross, because they're pretty obnoxious, and I don't really like them all that much. More like the Monica and Chandler. I don't know. They're pretty cool.
But so yeah, that's the reason that I didn't ask you whether or not Megan would be available for the show. So I want to keep that. People who want to see that's going to be on Wednesday, by the way. And now I forgot the time because I'm the producer and I'm floppy at my work.
I think it's 8 p.m. Eastern.
It was 8 p.m. Eastern, yeah. I think
Peter, you're just trying to keep people on 6 different shows coordinated across 3 to 5 continents.
Yes.
I don't know what you're bitching about, honestly.
And everything got messed up. I just wish that the US would finally conform to the rest of the world and do everything at the same time. The US just switched to daylight savings. Europe hasn't yet. So everything,
Canada,
my entire schedule
we've all been petitioning against. None of us want to do this. We all want to just ditch daylight savings time, pick a side, I don't care, and stop. Ugh. And it's always on a Sunday. And then my mom was like, can you come to church with me on Sunday? And I'm like,
ooh.
Fine, I'm wearing earbuds. I listened to Hitchens and Grid and Squared. It was fine.
Nice.
Okay, so just in case, I haven't seen the entire show. I watched part of it because you were on air at the same time that I was producing for Amarna. You did another show on slavery. What aren't you getting tired of that being the thing that you have to come on for?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to talk about something else. The problem is that either apologists ignore what we say and come up with some interesting arguments in response, or they develop completely new, out of this world apologetic arguments to try to either say, well, the slavery in the Old Testament wasn't, what you think it wasn't as bad as you think it was, or yeah, so it was bad, but the New Testament, the New Testament,
but yeah,
that makes
better. So
yeah. And it's not that you haven't written a book about it, because the link's in the description down below for people who want to know. There's the link to Dr. Josh and Megan's YouTube channel. I forgot the Twitter link, by the way. There's the link to the website and the link to 3 of Dr. Josh's books. So if you want to check them out, everything is down there. But so
I'm super excited to see Dr. Josh's books, but I'm going to derail Peter for just a moment.
Okay.
And because as a former Christian, I do understand how strange and contrived and convoluted and dementedly distressed many of the arguments attempting to ground morality in some sort of a definitional understanding of God are, and they lead to every absurdity and evil imaginable, and it's absolutely mind-numbing. I've seen it with slavery, I've seen it with rape, I've seen it with everything, genocide, everything imaginable. So I can certainly sympathize, and unfortunately, having written that book, you've put yourself somewhere at the forefront of that particular tilting that particular windmill, because honestly, apologists don't exist to convert strangers. They exist to keep the faithful convinced at any means, by any means necessary. But in the tradition of this channel and the actual questions of this channel, I was hoping to actually get more of your own personal beliefs and your own personal journey, because I find that deeply interesting, yours and your wife's journeys into, how you've held certain opinions, what you've changed your mind on, what you haven't, and how that sort of developed over time.
Yeah. Okay. That's a sort of big question.
But Feel free to cut it up as much as you want.
So I won't speak for Megan, just because I think you'd want to hear it from her.
Of course. Well, just where your journeys overlapped, perhaps.
Yeah. So the short version of this is I got saved as a fundamentalist evangelical Christian when I was 5 years old.
Yeah,
that's
right, baby.
See, you know how we do.
I know how we do.
But 26 years. I was an evangelical, young Earth creationist, the whole 9 yards. I pastored a church for 7 years as an associate pastor.
What denomination was that?
It was called the Grace Gospel Fellowship. So it's a dispensationalist church, if that means anything to you.
Oh, yes, it does.
But I did that while I was going to seminary. I got my bachelor's degree from Liberty University, and then I got a master's in theology from Capital Bible Seminary, both very fundamentalist evangelical schools. And so when I started my doctoral work, that's when I deconverted, because of what I learned. And so, people like to believe things about me like, oh, I hate God, or I wanted to sin, or, whatever. I just did an interview on, I guess it was yesterday, on Brady Goodwin's channel, who's the former Christian rapper Fanatic. And I don't know when that'll come out, I'm sure, but we went into detail about this particular question. And, I left the faith kicking and screaming.
Yep. Yeah.
And so I deconverted. I was an agnostic. I didn't really care what the label was at that point. And I'd been one for 3 years, roughly 3 years. And that's when Megan came to Hopkins. And met her there. I taught her a class, a Sumerian class, and I taught her an Akkadian class. And then
you fell in love over Hammurabi?
I'm telling you,
I once fell in love over the Greek word for worship. So
there you go.
Stranger things have happened. Proskuneo. Oh God. Yeah. Christian courtship is a very interesting beast, but that's a little different from what you went through, at least with your wife. Although I'm sure you have many an interesting recollection from before those times.
Oh, no doubt. But yeah, I mean, when I came in 2018 or whatever it was, when I started doing stuff on YouTube and social media, I was still identifying as an agnostic until somebody in philosophy pointed out that I actually should be considering myself an agnostic atheist. And so I was like, okay, that's cool. That works. So I go with atheist now.
Cool.
But yeah.
Cool.
Interestingly enough, I will say this. Megan is an Anglican. She's from the UK. So Megan identifies as a Christian. So, people,
at least sometimes, to hear her tell it, at least from what I've seen, she's like,
right.
Sometimes I identify as Christian, and there are days.
I'll tell you, in my experience, the days that she doesn't is when she's interacting with online Christians here. So.
Valid. That is very valid. I am never more antitheistic than when I am on Twitter, because oh my God, people, seriously, what the hell?
Yeah.
And I have to, if I share these experiences with Christian family members, universe, I have to be like, I know you're not like this. These are the crazy people. Unfortunately, they're very loud. You know?
And there are more of them than we would like to admit.
That is very true. I also was raised, fundamentalist, evangelical, young earth creationist. And I think one of the things I find most interesting about your work and area of initial expertise, at least, is a lot of Christian creationists, your Ken Ham types, your Answers in Genesis, that kind of jazz, will
really
try and pretend. Yeah. Well, the really fundy nut jobs, and they will try and pretend that evolution is the only thing that stands in the way of a true understanding of biblical Genesis creation. And the truth of the matter is, I had to train my mind to ignore so much. It wasn't just biology, it was geology, it was physics, it was history. I mean, just the history of the ancient Sumerians does not frickin' fit into that timeline on any plane of any universe. It doesn't work. And I missed out on so much beautifully interesting material, and it still kind of pisses me off. Little bit of my anti-theism comes from, stuff like that.
Right.
A little bit.
Right.
Not all
Makes
of it.
sense. Makes sense.
So there was so much cool stuff. And I remember a friend of mine, actually, Soapbox Atheist on Twitter, pointed out this connection between the tale of Inanna, where it talks about her marriage and how she says she's, they're trying to set her up with, a farmer. No, I'll only go with that. Or they're trying to set her up with a herdsman, but no, I'll only be with a farmer. And there's this, whole argument. And then they make up afterwards with what is presumably mythological sex. And that theme of, farming versus herding was something all throughout ancient literature and ancient mythology. And then I just, I could see it all through the Bible. I couldn't unsee it.
Right.
Cain and Abel, right from Cain and Abel, you have the same thing, the same heads and loggerheads, and, the shepherding obviously being the superior spiritual, because whatever. But it's just, there's so much knowledge, and it's all interwoven in this beautiful way. And I hate that I had to wait so long to learn so much of it.
I second that.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a shame.
So tell us what interests you most. Outside of course, your wonderful family. That is something of an argument against why you left the church to sin and, bake cookies with your kids.
I guess, people have asked me, this is where my brain goes when you ask me that. They ask me, what do you do for fun? And the first thing that goes to my brain is, well, I have 5 kids. So I'm not exactly sure what that would mean. Because I think that requires like free time. So the free time that I do have, I wake up at around 4:00 in the morning, and that's when I have time to myself until my 5-year-old wakes up around 5:30 and comes in and wants pretzels and cheese crackers. But
of course,
yeah. So for about an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes, I usually get time to write, to research, and to write.
Ooh.
And I try to do that every day. And so that's, people always ask, like, when do you sleep or when do you write? Like this, it's what I do to relax. Oddly enough, it's what I do for fun. So actually I'm currently working on the second revised and expanded edition of this guy.
Excellent.
And it's already twice as long as the first one. These apologists, man, they just keep coming out with new stuff. So
they just keep shoveling that bullshit.
Right.
You'd think they were trying to fertilize a rose garden instead of a faith, but
but this is sort of what interests me is, more broadly speaking, is there are so many bad apologetic arguments out there. And what's what was really eye-opening to me when I came online was realizing that so many of the things that my more progressive evangelical Christian friends who are in academia, the things that they think and believe, obviously I disagree with many of them, when it comes into contact with spirituality. Most of the stuff that apologists like Mike Winger or Frank Turek or, some of these guys, the things that they argue, at least about the Old Testament, are things that, they're just not, they're not issues in academic circles very often. And the example that always springs to mind is, I guess in 2019, I was made aware, I think that's when it was, I was made aware of Mike Winger. It might have been 2018, I don't know, but I was made aware of Mike Winger, and somebody sent me a video of his on the prophecy of the city of Tyre in Ezekiel 26. Now, when I went through Hopkins, one of the classes that I took was we just translated through the entirety of Ezekiel and discussed it in detail. And I remember thinking about chapter 26 and thinking why in the world, when I watched this video, why in the world would anybody argue this? Because his argument, of course, is that, well, the prophecy didn't fail.
And meanwhile, Google Maps enters the chat.
Right.
I've heard so many arguments that Tyre wasn't really there originally, despite the fact that you can see it's on the peninsula that was the original island that had the defenses with the, the spikes in the water and all that stuff. Look into it if you don't know. It's actually quite interesting how Tyre defended itself against sea attacks, and the boats knew, the trade boats knew the specific little route they could go to bring services. And now, of course, it's a peninsula, and there's just no way to justify that and pretend that the original Tyre that totes for real existed somewhere else, shut up, was destroyed according to the prophecy. But it's I remember what it was like as an evangelical. I remember feeling a certain loyalty and a need to defend even bad ideas, because even in my 20s, going through apologetics, I was honest enough with myself to say that apologetics could only take me to my beliefs are not entirely irrational. And that's not enough to get anyone in. That's just enough to keep you in if you're already in.
Yeah.
But yeah, Tyre is one of those things where it's just the reality denial is palpable, and the more you know about it, the more obvious it is.
Yeah.
And I've tried to point out to several of the sort of fundamentalist evangelical creationist type Christians that concept of God is very childish.
Well,
and very,
Lilith,
very immature.
It gets worse. It gets worse. You said,
I know.
Google Earth and enters the chat. Well, we have something. We have something new. We have this chat AI now, chat CPT. And I don't know if any of you have heard of him. I think Dr. Josh may have. This lovable guy called Jungle Jargon. He's a younger.
I do know that name.
Yes, so
I do know that name.
I'm so sorry for you. My apologies. My sincere condolences. But so he did a video.
He did a video. People logic breaks down.
He did a video 2 days ago, and so he decided to go into a conversation with the Chat GPT. And ChatGPT confirmed that evolution isn't a real thing. So that to him was evidence that because obviously this AI agrees with him, now evolution is false. So I'm just giving you a heads up, Dr. Josh. This is going to be a thing with everything you argue against in the Bible, because it's probably going to be a thing.
People conspiracy AI that knows all the truth behind the evil Illuminati something told them that it wasn't a thing.
We also have a few questions from the chat that I wanted to highlight. I think I may have missed this part because I don't really understand it, but from bigzebra.com, he or she said, I heard that the Grace Gospel Fellowship was a party church. So
tell us the truth.
That's a little scary that he was able to find that. I'm not exactly sure how he did that, but that was the name of the church that I pastored at. Oh, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't be. No, I feel like with him,
I think you mentioned it.
I should
briefly, very briefly.
Oh, did I?
Yes.
Oh, so if anybody doesn't know, I have MS.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's just one of the things that I struggle with is short-term memory loss. So yes, now that you've said that, I do remember saying that. I was really impressed there for a second. If anybody does want to see me preach a sermon, though, if you go to Digital Hammurabi and type in like sermon or Digital Hammurabi sermon or something like that, it's a 45-minute sermon that we've uploaded. It was my last sermon that I ever preached. I usually refer people to it when they're like, "You weren't a real Christian." Like, oh yeah, there you go.
See, I just point out that nobody who ever knew me as a Christian has ever said that ever.
In all fairness, what I get a lot is when I'm talking to, especially when I'm talking to young Earth creationists, someone we've had on quite recently, as a matter of fact, and someone that you're going to have a conversation with on this channel, for which I'm really excited. P-Town, he said he used to be an atheist, and from his talking about this, I don't think he was a real atheist, but I've actually got arguments to defend that, because if you're an atheist and you out of the blue start praying to a God you don't think exists, then I don't think that you're an atheist, because that's literally the only thing.
I mean,
you don't believe that a God exists. So why would you start talking?
I cannot believe in the supernatural and still perform a witchcraft ritual just for kicks or laughs, or to exercise the part of me that, was taught that would send me to hell. And I just want to, get rid of that through something practical. So, I mean, you could do it for laughs.
And for the people who think that Lilith actually is in hell at the moment, that's not hell. Those are two birds. That's a painting right behind her.
It's the phoenix and the nightingale. Yep. I painted it, and this is a digital version of my oil painting.
Beautiful.
So thank you. It's my icon for a reason. It holds significance to me, but today is not about me. No. Today is about the illustrious Dr. Josh.
And the next question is from a former panel member from Onras Corancho, Anton Gomez. Hi, Anton Gomez. Dr. Josh, do you know about the Queen of Sheba and why the Bible does not name her, unlike other books like the Quran? And does he know Xenogears? No clue what that is.
What was the last part?
Xenogears. Xeno.
Xenogears.
And then gears.
I mean, I don't know about the gears part. Isn't or is that Xenu?
Xenogears? Well, who do we know the origin of this tale of the Queen of Sheba, and if there's anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read about that in probably a decade. Yeah, I probably wouldn't have much to say on that off the top of my head, and certainly not as it relates to the Quran. But like, there are reasons that, I guess more broadly, there are reasons that certain figures that we might expect to be named specifically, for example, like the Pharaoh in the Exodus story. Often the biblical writers know how to name actual people, right? So like if they're not, if a character is not mentioned, particularly when one would think that they would be given historical documentation maybe that we have now, or that they may have had back then. Yeah, I mean, I think those are questions that should lead us to what is the text doing. Certainly with something like the Exodus,
Yeah.
there's a reason that it's being left open like that.
Well, I must say, on Aaron's Bible study, I know you're always welcome. We have, I was certainly excited with the prospect of potentially having you there, but I do understand you're very busy and you have 5 children. So, but we are just getting into Exodus, the beginnings, or chapter 4, I think, this past Saturday. So, but very much looking at, and P-Town is, vigorously defending it as a historical narrative, which is interesting. But honestly, learning that it was so widely regarded as a myth did have a significant impact on my faith. Do you remember what it was, sort of one of the keystones for you? Not that any one thing was the only thing that changed your mind on biblical history and the way to understand it and inerrancy claims, but was there something that sort of was a key point for you in that transition?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of it had to do with this history cycle that I was taking my first semester at Hopkins.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the history of Syria, Palestine. And so we were, just starting back, I think, in the 3rd millennium, and just sort of walking through ancient Near Eastern history, focusing more on the region of Syria, Palestine. And I remember things started to get really problematic for me when we started talking about the Amarna period. Now, for anybody that doesn't know, the Amarna period is 14th century BCE. It's a time that we found, we archaeologists discovered near 400 tablets, I think 382 cuneiform tablets in Tel El Amarna in Egypt. But they're written in cuneiform, which was the language of international trade at the time. Anyway, many of these, most of them, in fact, are correspondence between the rulers that ruled in the land of Canaan and the Pharaoh, who was their overlord. And at that time, Canaan was was like a
vassal state.
As province. I think there were 3 provinces. And so there were Egyptian officials, that were stationed. And of course, so that it's clear, Egyptology is not my area of expertise. But yeah, I mean, this is just sort of what everybody knows about this period. And that became a real problem for me very quickly, because this is, at least a half century later than what my understanding of the date of the Exodus was. If it more like, an entire century later. And so this was sort of the first, wait a minute, we know a lot about this period. There's nothing in here that even remotely suggests anything that would be even making that would even make something like the Exodus event possible. Then the tipping point for me was when we were studying the fall at the end of the Late Bronze Age, which is right around 1200 BCE. In the Mediterranean region, we see system-wide collapse over many different cities. And there's a group of people that are associated with this collapse, and they're called the Sea Peoples. And we have a lot of information in Egypt about them. But one of the groups that made up the Sea Peoples were the Peleset. And the Peleset are the Philistines. And so we know when the Philistines entered the region as a group. And it makes what's said in the book of Genesis, for example, about the Philistines not really plausible. And so I remember at that point in that class, it was so clear to me that from a historical standpoint, there were problems, lots of problems with the biblical text. And as a fundamentalist evangelical, if there's, one card that falls, so fall they all.
True. Yes.
And so that was sort of it for me. That was
There's a part of me that wonders if evangelical Christianity hasn't signed its own death warrant by being so dogmatic. I wish I had my my library with me, because I managed to pillage the library of a pastor who was moving to the Caribbean, actually, to take up a completely different job. And he had this book sort of compiled of Sunday school essays written in the 20s, and which is where a lot of, you can actually trace sort of at least some of the literary origins of the current fundamentalist movement, though it goes back further than that. And this idea of taking the Bible literally being so fundamental to the faith, and that it was, an attack. Anything that found other than that was an attack on God. And it makes me wonder if evangelical Christianity hasn't, in a certain sense, signed its own death warrant by being so rigid.
I don't know. I don't know about the latest.
Remember that as one card falls, so fall they all mentality, and eventually a card will fall.
I don't know about the latest figures. The thing is that the amount of Christians is going down. The amount of young Earth creationists is going up, probably as a direct effect to Ken Ham, I guess.
People are splitting on the. They're splitting either going
Ken Ham
into.
Ken Ham is a lot more dangerous than people think, because he's now getting into the whole homeschooling business, providing curriculum. So
he's tried to come to Alberta, Canada several times. I believe he has.
He has. So a former TV host of Creation Ministries International is now the president of Answers in Genesis in Canada. So they have a decent foothold there already.
Thank you for telling me that, because I need to know that information. I'm going to be taking as much action as I can to defend my country against the incursion of fascism. And young Earth creationism is absolutely part of that. But it's terrifying to me in certain ways. And as much as I love Aaron Ra, and I love him so much, and I'm so privileged to be part of his show, I love speaking with him. There's the part that he doesn't understand is that people are using, honestly, what I would term cult techniques to indoctrinate. It doesn't have to do with just showing the evidence for a thing and having a reasoned argument and good citations. And the way that I remember being taught to think in ways that I now recognize to be deeply intellectually dishonest, but I was being taught that that was the way I had to think when I was 5 or 6. And what the hell does a 5 or 6-year-old know about intellectual honesty and standards that are expected in scholarship? Like, that I didn't know that shit. So it's disturbing, and it's
and what's worse is when you're indoctrinated at that age, and I've met several people who have told me so and confirmed what I already thought, is that it becomes part of their identity. So once you get to the point where you're doubting what you've been told, then you have to reinvent yourself, which is extremely difficult, because you have no clue of who you are anymore, because what can you trust? I mean, it's your parents who told you this for the most part. So
somewhat, or at least laid the foundations that you should listen to certain authorities who then took it the rest of the way. But I'll say this in credit to Dr. Josh. It takes a tremendous amount of internal strength to have the courage to challenge ideas that have been placed as the foundation of who you are as a person. It takes so much mental, intellectual strength and courage and a choice to be courageous, to get out of that. And so I commend you for that, because I know how hard that fight is. And you deserve a great deal of credit for that.
I appreciate it's very kind. I know, as you were talking, the one example that comes to my mind
Mm.
About that sort of indoctrination, that sort of cult mentality, I would have been impervious to any type of a logical argument or an evidential argument about something like evolution, because I had I had an argument that to me was foolproof, and so
Mhm.
there was no need to investigate any further because it worked, right? And the
Mhm.
argument was, I'm sure that lots of people have this. Uh, People would talk to me about evolution, and they'd say, "Well, look, how can the Earth have all these features of being old, and the universe have these features of being old?" And I'd say, "Well, I don't know that that's true, but let's assume that it is. How old did Adam look when he was 30 seconds old?" And they'd look at me like I had two heads, but I would say he probably looked like he was in his 20s or 30s, right? He didn't look like he was 20 seconds old. And they'd say, "Well, okay. I mean, that makes sense from the narrative if you're looking at it that way." And it's okay. So if you cut down a tree in the Garden of Eden, would it have rings? Well, if we're using the logic of Adam's 20 seconds old, but he looks like he's 30, he's got apparent age. So then a
Appearance
tree would have
age.
apparent age. The earth would
Mm.
have apparent age. The universe, apparent age. So none of that would be telling at all. Um, and and that shut down critical thinking instantly.
Mm.
And I say this in volume 2 of the Atheist Handbook. It's sort of the thread that runs through it.
Mm.
Um, but the insidious thing about being an evangelical, and particularly a fundamentalist evangelical, is that all you need in any argument is a possibility.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
you think about something, and the example that I think that I always give is from the book of Daniel. Of course, the big debate about the book of Daniel is, was it written in the 6th century or was it written in the 2nd century, like everybody says?
2nd
Yeah,
century. We
yeah,
know this,
yeah.
people.
Spoilers.
Spoiler alert. Well, you were on with Aaron and you were being so intellectually honest and scholarly. And I was like, just say we know it's not authentic, please, for the love of God.
If anyone's interested, I have an entire chapter dedicated to the dating of the book of Daniel in volume 1 of the Atheist Handbook.
Wonderful.
I have another chapter dedicated to the prophecy against Tyre in Ezekiel 26. So yeah, did Moses write the Pentateuch? There's a whole chapter dedicated to that. So all these things that show up all the time, like that's what I'm writing about. But you think about something like Belshazzar,
Mm.
and uh, you know, Belshazzar is always sort of like showcased by apologists. So you guys didn't even think that Belshazzar existed, you know, up until like a century ago. Yeah,
That's about how old all of their arguments are.
it's like good one, sick flex, bruh. But they'll say, well, look here, it says in the text that Belshazzar is the son of Nebuchadnezzar, and then you say, yeah, but he wasn't the son of Nebuchadnezzar; he was the son of Nabonidus. And they go, yeah, well, the word son can mean grandson. And so he was just Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. And you're like, yeah, but he wasn't Nebuchadnezzar's grandson. Right?
And also, it makes no difference for the entire narrative of Daniel that you're going to have this other king reigning after Nebuchadnezzar. We're not going to mention him. We're just
Yeah.
going to mention what happens after. And then, ooh, Lion's Den, fun, interesting story. No looky.
Yeah, I mean but what they will say in that moment is, well, now wait, now that's true, right? So Nabonidus is a usurper, but Nebuchadnezzar had a daughter that married the other king Neriglissar, and Neriglissar. So then Neriglissar. So isn't it possible that because Nabonidus was like a high rank, what couldn't he have married one of Nebuchadnezzar's daughters as well? And then isn't that possible? Josh.
That's
Isn't it
the
possible?
same thing I've seen. When I first became an atheist, I was working at a church part-time, and people let them know that I had, was backsliding. And I remember being struck when I had this conversation with the head minister and the minister who had hired me, that like they would just keep coming up with explanations. And all that there had to be was plausibility.
Yep.
Isn't it possible that blah, 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 blah explanation? And I remember being that person. As if you could come up with an explanation that accounted for all the facts, that's all you had to do.
Yep.
You did not have to provide any information or any evidence that explanation related to anything. And I had this moment with my father because before he died, my father stopped believing in hell, which I am deeply, deeply grateful for. I'm so, so grateful that he became a universalist before he passed. But he had this one moment where he was sharing his new beliefs with me. And I said, you know what, Dad? That's wonderful. And your version of God, your version, what you're presenting to me now is far more ethical, far more merciful, far more reasonable than so many versions of God. And that is true. And I commend that. But what reason do you have to consider that this version of God, which is so superior in so many ways to so many others, actually relates to reality? And he said, I'll get back to you. And he never did.
Yeah.
So it was that realizing that step was always missing. Was always cut out, wasn't even conceived of as possibly being necessary, that connecting the explanation to reality might be something you would have to do.
I honestly think like it's very much like a light bright. You guys remember light bright?
Oh, I love light bright.
Like, if anybody doesn't remember, we've just dated ourselves. I'm sorry about that, but light bright was this board, and you would take these little clear pegs that had different tints of color to them, and you'd stick them into these holes. There was looked like a very tiny pegboard, and you would stick
and you'd put a black paper on it, and it had, some of them were blank and some of them just had like coded Y for yellow, and you'd stick a yellow peg through and then it would glow through.
But at the finished product, the lights didn't touch one another.
No.
Right. But there was this background that held them all in place. And so if you could see a line that being formed by these individual pegs, they didn't actually need to touch, because there was this background that held them all, that you knew about, that was holding them all in place. And this is very much, I think, akin to what goes on in a fundamentalist evangelical mind. It did for me, is that background is there. And that background is the inspiration and inerrancy of the text. And we know that God exists. We know that it's the God that we believe in. It's utilizing the interpretive model that we have. And so that is our light bright. So all we have to do is get pegs that just kind of go the same direction. And they don't even have to be terribly close, but as long as they're pointing the right direction, as long as we
can jam them into one of the holes somewhere.
And it looks like they're drawing, and it looks like they're drawing a line between this statement and the answer that we need. As long as they're like sort of going, you don't need it to actually connect. And I think if anybody's ever seen, and then we can move on to something else. I've dragged this out too long, but like if anybody's ever seen the show Monk, Monk is a detective, and the whole premise of each show is that there's a murder, there's a crime of some sort, and the person that everybody knows committed it, it's impossible that they could have committed it. There's no way they could have, right? I'm thinking of one where the captain of the San Francisco Police Department is on Skype or on FaceTime or something with his girlfriend, and she's in her room, and they're having this conversation, and they hang up, and like 5 minutes later, there's a murder 80 miles from where she is, or something like that.
Unless she's Superman.
That's right. It's impossible.
Or the Flash.
And it's impossible, right? But as the viewer, she did it because Adrian Monk said she did it. And so from that point on in the show, all you need is a possibility. How is it possible that she could have done it? And of course, it's always like the craziest, like that in that particular instance. I probably shouldn't say this, it's spoiler, but spoilers.
It's one episode.
She's actually in a mobile like trailer that she's decorated exactly like her room. And the way that he finds out is she puts a pen down on the counter next to her, and it rolls, and she catches it. And he thinks to himself, why would that pen roll?
Maybe because the table was slightly uneven.
Nope, that's what did it for him, right? But this is the point, I think, is that if you know that Monk is always right, and you know that the show always has the person that you think did it in the beginning doing it.
Bones, same kind of thing.
Yeah, all you need is a possible explanation, because you already know it to be true. And so in this scenario where it's like, well, we know Daniel wrote this in the 6th century. Can you give me a possible way that could have happened? Done. That's all I need. That's all I need.
It's actually quite interesting because of my Christianity and my evangelical indoctrination, I developed a very interesting skill, which if I had no morals, I could make so much goddamn money off of, which is that I can make a justification for fucking anything. You have no money and you want to buy a $300 scarf, I will find a justification why you are doing this for the good of someone else.
Right.
And it's absolutely fundamentally necessary. I can find a reason for anything to do anything. But I have this uncomfortable thing that I'm not supposed to have because I don't believe in God, called morals.
Right.
Which means I won't give you a justification to kill people, destroy the planet, or generally fuck with innocent people. But I might give you an excuse to get out of hanging out with a person you don't want to hang out with.
Right.
Maybe I should set up a service. $30. I'll come up with an
airtight
excuse. I know it's ironclad because my brain is weird. So I'll give you like 65 levels of justification, but only use the first 3 if people ask. Hey, I learned a lie is only 3 questions deep, and I honestly believe on some level that was the beginning of my path to atheism.
Oh wow.
I had a little bit of training from some as part of another job. I wasn't a cop or anything, but I did have some training from some law enforcement individuals. And they actually, I don't know if you know this, you might find this very interesting, and I need to do a video about this at some point. Have you ever heard the argument about the Gospels where you have multiple witnesses, and because they don't line up perfectly, that means they didn't collude with each other?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, that argument always seemed really dumb for me, because collusion in scholarship and authorship is called sourcing, and it's a good thing to source from other sources, like a competent person who isn't pulling everything out of their own ass. But that's actually based in training for interrogation techniques, where they say, if you're talking to a set of eyewitnesses, expect, if they're honest and you've kept them separate and they haven't had time to collude, expect that they'll be basically the same, but there'll be some small differences, some small variation, because the mind doesn't remember everything identically. Different people, different things stand out to different people because of their psychology or what they were thinking about, or associations, just small things. They may not remember. I may remember that Jim came in before Susan, and you may remember that Susan came in before Jim.
Right.
This doesn't mean either of us lying. This is a normal variety. But this entire argument is based upon interviewing known eyewitnesses in real time. to use it for literary analysis is the stupidest fucking thing imaginable. It's like trying to shoe a horse with a codfish. That's not what you do with that.
Right.
This is not what this is made for. Codfish is lovely, but not to shoe a horse.
Right. Oh my gosh.
So this entire argument, I ended up learning it quite inadvertently as a matter of training for this other job. And so when apologists came with it, I was like, what the fuck? That is the most ridiculous application. Like, you don't use that. That's not a literary technique for analyzing data. I can't what? No. Like, you have to have real people that you interview and are or are claiming to be eyewitnesses, which none of the gospels qualify as, incidentally. And not things that would be subject to, sourcing. So it's, the wild misapplication of techniques is another thing that I've noticed in apologetics, which has led me to, honestly, in the end, I've come to the conviction that every professional apologist is a narcissist, because they're just completely out to lunch. I know there's some 20-year-olds who read a book and are really enthusiastic, who are not narcissists. They're just deceived. But the pros, the people regurgitating the same idiotic tripe over and over again, like Frank Turek,
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an important thing because Dr. Kip Davis and Dr. Dan McClellan and Dr. Jennifer Bird and Dr. Matt Monger and myself, like, we were the ones that are on that slavery panel the other day.
Yes.
And, we interact with apologists quite a bit, and they attempt to turn that sort of thing around on us. And you'll hear people say, and they'll usually say it in their own live streams when they're talking about us, but they'll say, we've corrected Dr. Josh on this.
Dr. Josh, we have a question from the chat, and I have to pull it out of sequence because it's not in line. But since you're talking about it, Iron Charioteer says, question for Dr. Josh: what did he think of Kip's rebuttal and video to praise?
So yes. So Praise and I have an interesting history, and I will say, and he knows this, particularly with respect to, and I haven't heard more recent things, but the last that I heard, it sounded like he was defending Kent Hovind, which,
Yep.
Please stop doing that.
Ham doesn't do that anymore.
Yeah, he did quite a few shows about that and invited him on his channel several times. Oh,
which saddens me, honestly.
Yeah, me too.
Because, like Praise, I've actually had very good offline conversations with Praise. Like I consider Praise to be a friend. This disappoints me, and I hope that he reconsiders this. But one of the things that, and we were talking about this, I think, offline, if I'm remembering that correctly beforehand, that the first interactions that I had with Praise were me responding in a pretty positive way to a video that he put up where he was trying to show people how to use Hebrew online resources, particularly those like on his phone. And my response to that is that's great, right? I think this is admirable. The problem that I see, or the potential problem that I see, is that when people substitute those apps and their lay interaction with them for actual scholarship. And so, listen, we're all guilty of doing this. Coming up through the ranks, we all did this.
Yeah.
A lot of times, this is what got people like me interested in working with Hebrew and Greek and these other languages. So it's not like I'm super knocking him on this at all, but it's just wisdom ultimately has to win out here, where you say, okay, if I'm using this app on my phone, looking at this, verse in Genesis, and I've come up with this new reading, right? This new translation of this particular word and what it should mean. And I look through 80 different versions and none of them say that.
Maybe there's a reason.
At this point, it's a good question. But it has to be a question. You have to go to someone that understands the languages and the context and say, hey, I'm probably wrong here, right? But this is what I've come up with. Can you tell me why? A good example of this, and to his credit, Praise recognized the error when I pointed it out to him and corrected himself. So I want to give him credit for this. But in Exodus 21, verse 20, everybody probably is familiar with this slavery verse. It says, if a man beats his male or female slave with a wooden rod and they die immediately, the master is to be punished, or the man is to be punished. Well, the way the Hebrew works there is the word punished. If you pull it up in an interlinear online, like Blue Letter Bible or something, you'll see the verb there twice. And I think it's nakom yanakem. I'd have to look at it, but it's from the root nakam, and it shows up twice. And if you don't know Hebrew, it would be like seeing he will be punished in English, and you're like, why in the world would punished be there twice? And what he concluded, again, it's very clever, right? But what he concluded was that one verb had the master as the subject, and the other verb had the slave as the subject. And so it was like,
the slave's already beaten to death. How is he going to be punished?
So, what he determined was, if the slave does something wrong, he'll be punished. But if the master does something wrong, he'll be punished. And it's like, okay, like A for effort, right? Like this is with the tools that you have and the experience and education that you have, like this
would get a good mark in first year.
Right. It's like, hey, way to like dig into that.
Yeah.
But the answer is far less flashy, right? In Hebrew, if I were to say to you, I'm very hot, and then somebody said to you, I'm very, very hot, what would be the difference between those two statements? One
10
is
degrees.
Yeah, right. One is I'm very hot, but the other one is like I'm super hot. Like it's emphasizing how hot I am. So I'm even hotter is the point. That's what Hebrew does in a sense. If it uses that particular verbal construction, it's emphasizing in some way that verbal action. So anyway, it's less flashy, but that's what the Hebrew is doing. And so anyway, all that to say this, Praise recently had an argument that in Semitic languages, there is a letter that has an SH sound.
Yeah, the one that looks like a W, right?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. And they call it the sheen or the shin.
Maybe sheen. Yeah.
But you can hear it, so the sh sound. But instead, when you write that in English, you can't write those things in Hebrew for people in a book or something. You can, but they won't be able to read it. So when you transliterate it, you could write SH. So for example, the word shalom. Everybody knows the word shalom.
Yeah. Peace.
In English books, they write SHALOM, right? Everybody gets that. You see the SH sound. But in more academic works, SH, it's a little clunky. And there are reasons why it's a little clunky. And so instead of writing SH all the time, what they will do is they've created a symbol that is the SH sound. And it's an and it's an S with a little V at the top, a little a carrot, I think is what it's called.
Kind of, yeah.
And
I've studied a tiny bit of linguistics. It was a long time ago, but I am familiar with IPA and other forms of International Phonetic Alphabet and whatnot. And I reckon, I mean, TH, there's at least 2 sounds in the broadest sense associated with th and th are different, but
That's right.
I mean, the tongue is the same. It's voicing or unvoiced. And those have distinct symbols for them, which if you're reading an IPA is important. And if you're transliterating, I mean, I can totally see that being a thing, but sorry, I didn't mean that.
No, but this is good. Like you're bringing the point out. And so what happened is there's a word in Hebrew, ish, and ish means man. And man shows up all over the place. But when you write it, if you write it in this, the writing it out in this, more academic form where they're not writing SH, you'll see an I and then the letter S with a V on top of it. And that V on top of it looks really weird if you don't know what it is.
Yes.
And Praise read, I guess, a commentary by Douglas Stewart. I haven't looked it up yet. Kip did, apparently. And I think misunderstood maybe what Stewart was arguing and focused in on this V on top of the S.
Yeah, I could see that.
And made this argument that it's that little V on the top of the S that is the real thing that drives the meaning of that word. And it's like,
bless his heart.
And again,
bless his heart.
Again, these are good questions that, like, when I get these in an email from somebody that's genuinely curious, I may not always have time to respond. I don't want to let everybody, think I always have time to respond. But
you have 5 kids. You have 5 kids. If you don't respond, you have 5 kids. That is your excuse.
Right. But that's where I want to see those ideas is in an email asking, hey, what do you think about this? Is this anything?
I feel like these are questions I would ask at a first-year university level in a specific subject.
Yes.
And don't get me wrong, there are areas in which I am absolutely at that level. And like, I may say some stupid shit, and please correct me if you have expertise in that area. I am not beyond being corrected. I love knowledge for its own sake. I'm not here to show off, look, I know all the things with it. I don't know all the things. I want to know more things. I love knowing things. Yay. But yeah, that's the kind of thing that, like, absolutely. First year university, A for effort. Like, you're really thinking. I appreciate that you're thinking and the way you're thinking. You need more information.
Yeah.
But good on you for getting in there with the subject matter.
That's right.
And that's great. That's really great as part of a journey. That is not great for establishing yourself as some sort of an expert in the subject when you're I'm sorry. Christian apologetics gives me several migraines, and every once in a while I feel the urge to do what Cool Hard Logic suggests and get an oven mitt so I won't face palm through my own forehead.
Oh, you're muted, Peter, I think. Or I can't hear you.
Sorry. We have to get to some questions from the chat. I always try that if people put questions in there, I will try and bring all of them up. Bree,
good.
High Science, who's also in the chat, asked, and this is one thing that I would like to know. What was Dr. Josh's favorite debate on the topic, and who was his favorite interlocutor?
Ooh. That's a good question.
See?
I think that my favorite debate, and I love doing debates with Skylar. If anybody's not seen me do debates with Skylar Fiction, like they're some of the best. But as far as on the particular topic of slavery, I think my favorite debate was the one that I did with Matt Dillahunty against Stuart and Cliff Conneckley, who are, it's a father and son apologetics team. They are the ones that go around to like Harvard and Yale and, you know, some of these other high level schools on the campuses and like generally talk to the students and like try to, you know, challenge them on what they believe. That one was a lot of fun, primarily because on the topic, Matt, and I don't want to take anything away from Skylar. Skylar knows a lot about slavery as well. But I think Matt has talked for so many years about the topic to so many different people that he was just chomping at the bit to attack them. And all I had to do is just sort of hit my mute button and just sort of sit back, you know, and smile. And every once in a while, you know, they'd be like, oh no, the Hebrew word doesn't say that. And Matt would just go, Josh, and I'd lean forward and hit my little mute button. And I'd say, okay, here's what it says, blah, 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 mute. And then I'd sit back. And it was great because it was
just
so
as rabid, but possibly a little less honed than Christopher Hitchens. But I love that. Just and I mean, I've seen Matt Dillahunty's show, as every good atheist has, and I can completely understand the frustration just building to get out and be like, ah!
Yeah. You know, at one point, he like hit his microphone. And he said, I'm done. I can't deal with these people anymore. And just like hit the microphone away from himself.
He's so used to shutting people off. And like, I get objections to that attitude, but at the same time, Jesus Christ, have you heard these people? I've heard them from the inside, as have you, Dr. Josh. I have heard them actually tell me as a teenager that the majority of people who come to Christ have to at least have an experience coming to Christ before they're 18 or they're lost forever. And apparently that was an argument in favor of us indoctrinating our classmates. I have heard them claim explicitly, with zero irony, that a cause must be greater than the effect and understand the effect, which again is the basis of so much apologetic bullshit around the Big Bang and the origin of the universe and all that shit. And like, it's so unjustified in all of our experience. When have you ever understood every subsequent iteration of the consequences of any action you have ever taken in the whole of your fucking life?
My biggest problem when that topic comes on is when they start defending indentured servitude as being a good thing, as being a moral thing.
Yeah, because it's diet slavery, so it's better.
Yeah, but it's still a form of slavery. It's still a form of owning someone as property. So I don't think...
And they ignore the fact entirely that form of indentured servitude only existed for Jewish people, and depending if you're reading
only for Jewish Hebrew males. Yes.
It meant, exactly. So it meant you could completely own foreign slaves. Your slaves are to come from the people around you. From them, you may own slaves. You are to make them your slaves for life. You are to give them to your sons and daughters as an inheritance. That is what the scripture says.
You could also do that with Hebrew women, which...
It depends. Again, Leviticus versus Deuteronomy, and we'll get into authorship on that. No. There is a direct contradiction there in Leviticus versus Deuteronomy. The same law is given twice, but with a direct and explicit difference between the treatment of men and women. And the Levitical one is thought to be a priestly source, and the Deuteronomical one is one written by whoever that priest is who raised Josiah the king as a little child. We'll get into that in the Bible study.
Well, we have to be fast, Lilith, because we're running out of time. So, Dr. Josh, what's your take on this? Because, as far as I know, Hebrew women could be enslaved for life, just like foreigners, and there would be no way out.
Yeah. So it depends on where you're looking. So in the covenant code in Exodus 21, Peter, you're absolutely right. So the Exodus 21, 2-6 talks about male debt slaves, Israelite debt slaves. They're to serve for 6 years. And if the master gives the woman a wife who is a chattel slave, if the master gives the man a wife who is a chattel slave, she and any children that she produces remain the property of the master. And at that point, the man could say after a 6-year term of service that he was just going to opt to be a chattel slave, and so he could remain a chattel slave.
Yeah, he would be bored through the ear with an awl because I love my master.
But isn't there a distinct difference? Isn't there a distinct difference that the female slaves are not to be set free in the year of Jubilee
as the males are?
As the males are.
Right. So in verse 7, if a man sells his daughter as an amah, as a female slave, she will not go free as the male slaves do. And this is a woman who's being sold, a daughter is being sold into concubinage for her sexual capacities. And yes, you're absolutely right. If the man, even if the man, finds her displeasing, as long as he continues to provide 3 things for her, it's debated what the third thing is.
As long as he continues to feed her and breed her, as Aaron Ross so explicitly and accurately puts it. There is one iteration where the women are treated as the men in that specific sense of being released after a certain number of years. But in the others, she is always explicitly not only kept in perpetual servitude, but used as a chain to any slave that she is given. If she is given to another slave and bears some children, then wife and children and the arms of loving babes are used to convince a man to give up his freedom for life because he will not abandon his babes. The loving arms of children should never be used to supplement the vile chains of slavery. And this is an abhorrent thing. And it's absolutely explicitly iterated in the scripture. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to speak over you, Dr. Josh, but this is just something that really I've looked at, obviously, quite explicitly in my magical duct tape Bible. I recovered my Bible with duct tape. It's very durable. What can I say? But it also kind of pisses me off. And I have to say, the speeches of Colonel Robert Greene Ingersoll after 200 years after the Civil War and everything else have lost none of their potency. And if you have the privilege of being able to research them, I suggest that you do so.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that the way the biblical texts lay out slavery is certainly not this happy-go-lucky form that apologists like to lay out. And I think one of the things that people don't recognize, that's very important to recognize in a passage like Exodus 21, is what you see in verses 28 to 32, which, a lot of times you just don't get there. If you're talking about slavery, you stop after verse 27 because that's where first of all, they misunderstand, apologists misunderstand. They think that slaves are granted, what we affectionately call lex talionis, right? The eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth principle. They're not, very explicitly not given that.
Freedom for an eye or a tooth.
That's right, which is far less than what it would be if you had a right to the master's eye or tooth. But if you go down to verse 28, it talks about the goring ox incident. And this is something that I think if apologists would spend a little bit of time on, it would be a whole new set of problems for them. Because the text talks about if you have an ox who's known to gore people and or known to gore, in general, and the master has been told about it, and he doesn't take the necessary steps to pen the animal up, and an ox gores to death a free man or a free woman or a child of a free man or free woman. The person that owns the ox is sentenced to death. Right now, he can ransom his way out of it with money to the surviving members of the family, but they have a right to his life. But then the text says, and if it gores a slave, 30 pieces of silver, 30 shekels of silver.
Yeah.
And that's a problem. If you're trying to make this argument that from a legal standpoint or from the eyes of God, all men are equal, and like in the biblical
women
text,
and slaves were property in those days. And it's disgusting to us. And it's disgusting for good reason, because I am a fucking human being. And I defy anyone to stand toe to toe with me and claim themselves superior. But I have had to fight that battle my whole life. I have had to fight that battle from elementary school with boys who couldn't understand what I was saying because I was hyperlingual and literally speaking at a university level, and they had no fucking clue what I was saying. So this devaluation is very fucking real, and the ripples of it are being felt to this day, and I felt them in very real senses. And I will be damned if I let them pretend that it wasn't really what it is.
Yeah, I would encourage, and I know, Peter, we've got to start wrapping this up. Sorry, I'll be quick.
Yeah, we have a couple questions left. So
I would just say everybody should go watch that. There's a section, actually, Correa, on her TikTok. If everybody knows Correa, she clipped it out. It's like a 6-minute video of Dr. Jennifer Bird in that slavery panel that we did, responding to Deuteronomy 21 and the apologetic, challenge that is often made that says, well, sure, maybe the women were taken captive and raped, but isn't that better than leaving them to die?
No.
And I would just, your reaction is exactly the same as what her reaction was. I suspect you would say similar things.
These were women, children. These were babies whose only qualification was that they had not fucked anyone yet, and they were certain of that.
Yep.
And the thing that, and then I'll be quiet, but I think one of the things that men need to recognize is, you don't know what it's like to be raped.
Exactly.
And I don't know what it's like to be raped. You don't know what it's like to have someone pin you down and penetrate you against your will. So until you do, shut the fuck up about this topic and let women tell you what it's like.
And it's more than the act itself, because I think this is an important element to know. No, this is where women and men differentiate, because I have spent
10 years of, hold on.
I
have spent 10 years of my life with a woman who was raped repeatedly through a 20-year marriage. Her husband brought home other guys that she needed the pleasure. So the after effects of that, even 10 years after, are still so incredibly severe that you can't fathom what this person has gone through. And you don't have the right. You don't have the right to talk for these people. Not ever.
Yeah.
I would like to say one thing on behalf of women as opposed to men, because I know men can be raped. I have known men who have been raped, but I know no men, and I have never known any man who has had to take steps every day of their life to ensure they are not raped. Yeah. Who, when you go to a group meeting and you say to everyone present, what steps did you take to ensure you were not raped on the way here tonight?
That's the most disgusting question you could ask.
And the women will say, And the women, but it's accurate though. And the women will say, I parked in the light. I made sure I was near a street light.
Yeah.
I held my keys between my fingers. I had
Still, Lilith, I have to interrupt you.
keychain.
I have to interrupt you because if you're going to ask that question to a rape victim, you're blaming them for what has happened. That is how they are going to perceive it. That's how they are going
to do that.
No, so
I actually want to propose that question to men.
Yeah,
because men are not aware of the steps that women take every day of our lives, even if we have not been victims of sexual assault. To just take those steps to be safe, because someone will always blame us explicitly or implicitly. And granted, like, you don't run naked through certain areas of town or any areas of town. I'm in Canada, it's too freaking cold to run naked. But like, there's this sense of this is what you have to do to be safe. And if you don't do these things, then you were unwise. Maybe you weren't guilty, but you were unwise.
It depends. So hold on. It depends on where you live, because in Germany, you still have the right. If you're in a public park, you can be there naked. It's called FKK, Freikörperkultur. It is accepted everywhere.
Good for Germany.
These women aren't raped. It is the men who have the problem. It's the men who make these rules and build up a thing so where they can at least in their own mind justify. Hold on, Lilith. They build up this thinking.
I'm not saying that there's anything.
I need to finish my sentence. I need to finish my sentence.
Okay.
The men build up their own justification just in case, because now they can fall back. Well, yeah, but she had a short skirt on, or she was a tiny bikini, or it was this, or it was that. That just needs to stop. You do not have the right to touch anyone without their specific consent. Period.
And that is true. And that is true. And that should be taught everywhere.
Yes.
But nonetheless, as being part of culture, Peter, I have to tell you that every woman you have ever encountered has been taking steps her own whole life, every day, to prevent herself from being victimized, or to at least minimize the probabilities.
Yes.
And that's a risk that we deal with by intelligent, reasonable actions that men don't. And that's the difference, is that every single day of our lives is spent considering that question when yours is not. That's the difference that I'm pointing to.
We do have to move on because we're running out of time, and we have 2 questions left that I really want to put out.
Yes, I want to hear more questions for Dr. Josh.
One of my friends, Deviant Outcast, she's and I'm going to be butchered if I say this wrong. She's an amateur Egyptologist, and I love talking to her. Ooh. I met her, by the way, on a channel, an anti-Kent Hovind channel run by Mark Stoney, who was in chat earlier but had to leave. So that's where we end up talking. Deviant Outcast asks, Dr. Josh, how do we get through the indoctrination to even get fundamentalists to listen to historical facts? And then she said, to clarify my question, as Dr. Josh was a hardcore believer, yet his indoctrination didn't withstand the historical facts, he could possibly have interesting insight on the topic.
Yeah, it's tough. And actually, I was talking about the thread that runs through volume 2 of the Atheist Handbook. And it was actually born out of a conference that I did for the Atheist Network Group in 2022 called the Better Conference, which will be put on again this year. So everybody should go. But it is essentially all the speakers are supposed to engage with the question of how to have better conversations with apologists and believers about these difficult topics. And it goes hand in hand with what I was saying earlier about the possibility. All they need is a possibility. So if you engage with someone and they say, well, isn't it possible that Nebuchadnezzar was Belshazzar's, grandfather through Nabonidus, who married one of Nebuchadnezzar's daughters. If you come back at a fundamentalist with, no, that's not possible, well, that's probably disingenuous, because is it possible? I mean, yeah, I think it's possible. Like, how possible? Not very. But I mean, like, it's history, it's the past, right? I guess that's like anything's possible, right? With enough imagination. But that if you come back with, no, all, like, they know that it's possible, because again, is it possible that aliens built the pyramids? Yeah, I mean, I guess that's possible. Is anything's fucking possible, right? So what I do is I say, sure, that's possible. Now, tell me why it is the most reasonable conclusion. In other words, when they say, isn't it possible, the burden of proof is shifted, whether you know it or not, the burden of proof is shifted onto you to deductively disprove their possibility. And in history, like, it's just, you're not going to do that, right? That's really, really hard. If possible at all. I'm not a philosopher, but the burden is now shifted to you. So they can say things like, well, wait a minute, you point out that the city of Jericho during the late Bronze Age, there's nothing but a little village there, right? And that the city of Ai, both of these that were supposed to be burned to the ground, like, wiped out, there's nothing there, right? Ai had been deserted for 1,000 years, right? Well, they could say, well, isn't it possible that erosion has taken the whole, context, that whole layer off? Isn't that possible? It's just taken it off. And at Ai, isn't it possible that they've misidentified the site, and it's actually supposed to be another site that's like a mile away? Isn't that possible?
Yeah.
The burden is now shifted to you. You have to disprove the possibility.
You know what it reminds me of?
Yeah.
It reminds me of being in toxic relationships with men where I felt it necessary to make up excuses for them. It's the same it's the same line of reasoning. And
but it's
one of the things that was so fundamental for me was taking 11 and 12 chemistry and physics and learning the concept of degrees of certainty of significant figures. Like, you're familiar with the concept of significant figures. You can calculate anything measured to a certain number of significant figures, plus or minus. And, the error margin could be so small as to be entirely insignificant.
But I think it's better to know,
technically an error margin.
I think it's better to know that if people are trying to shift the burden of proof, that is where you need to step in and make sure that they don't. Because I think it's a dishonest way of countering a certain argument. If you can come up with anything that could be possible, and so if you think it could be possible, then now you get the burden of proof from me again, because now prove that it is possible. And that's not always the case.
That's the point that you're hitting it right on the head, right? This is what I'm suggesting needs to happen. I'm not saying that it's going to work in every case, but I have found in my experience that it's got a higher likelihood to work. When they say those things, isn't it possible that Jericho is just eroded away? You say, yeah, sure, that's possible. Now, make that argument.
Yeah.
Show me from the archaeological site, show me from the data why I should hold that position to be true. Yeah. And once you do that, now the burden is back on them to make their argument. They can't just say, isn't it possible? Because, and at that point, and then I'll be quiet, but at that point, they may start to try to explain it and realize
this wasn't a good
really
move.
ad hoc.
Yeah, this isn't a good move.
Yeah.
This isn't a good move. Yeah.
I don't have nearly as much support as I thought I did.
Exactly.
And you don't have to ever be silent, Josh. This is your show. Genuinely, this show is about you. It's about your perspective.
And I have a great question left.
Talk over you, smack my wrist.
I have a great question left.
But that's entirely accurate.
One thing,
the good question.
One thing I need to correct: Deviant Outcast has a master of Egyptology and a master of archaeology. So, not
awesome.
an amateur. So I did butcher that. My apologies. I should have known because I think she's mentioned it before. Our final question from the chat, and this is probably going to be one that you're gonna love, Dr. Josh. It's from someone who's always around when we do a live show, and have seen them around wherever I go. Iron Charioteer says, question for Dr. Josh. What do you think praise should take up as a hobby when he leaves Christianity?
That is, I
vote macrame.
There are definitely certain people that I like. I won't say he's one of them, but there are certain people that I think are sort of bound for atheism.
If they remain honest.
Yeah.
Yes.
And this is the one thing that I think is true about praise. Again, in my experience with him, I can't read his mind or anything. But whenever I get him one-on-one, particularly offline,
I was just going to say, because when I've had conversations with him on his channel when there are no other guests and just the side chat. You can have a really good conversation with Praise. You can have a conversation with Olive. You can have a conversation with Sparrow. I've had good conversations with all three of them. The moment people come in, that's where you're in trouble. And I think Praise needs to get that under control, and he could do a lot better. Just that was
it's clannishness. It's plain and simple clannishness.
I will say this, one of the things that Praise and I have said offline to one another, and again, I want to reiterate this, Praise, please rethink your position on Kent Hovind and the horrific things that he's done. Because I actually do think that deep down, in my experience anyway, Praise is a genuine person. But in the conversations that I've had offline with him, at the end, he'll say things like, listen, hey, I won't come after you or something on this. And I'll say, hey, this is the WWF out here, right? We're in this for entertainment. Like Skylar, when I was going on Skylar's channel, this is wrestling, right? This is Macho Man Randy Savage, this is what it's about. So we would actually, before a debate, we'd be offline, the four of us, he'd have a partner, and Skylar and I, and we'd be talking and laughing and everything would be great. And then as soon as it went live, he'd be like, my stupid opponents, they are so dumb. And it was just, you could just see, it's like, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. Let me tell you what I'm doing. What am I doing? I'll tell you what I'm doing. I'm going to tell you what I am going to do. It's like,
John Cena.
and I have to say, in defense of Praise, he's not the only one who's doing this. I've met a few others who and I've had guests on this show who I had a decent conversation with. The moment you get them on the show, it all goes south. And I have no clue why they're doing that, because and this is why I have started vetting our theist guests a lot more, because I'm not interested in a dumpster fire. We'll get the views. We'll get a lot of subscribers if we're going to do that.
Yeah.
But problem number one is once you start doing dumpster fires, there's no way back. because you will end up with an audience that
No,
only
it's
likes dumpster
100%
fires,
dumpster
and
fires.
so you have to keep it up.
I memorized
And then
90% of this motherfucker.
and
Don't
then
you
you
waste it on dumpster fires.
yeah, but then you end up that no one wants to come on your channel anymore. So I'm more interested in having a good conversation. We won't agree. We won't agree when the show is over. You will still have your position. I will still have my position. All of that is clear. But we don't have to be insulting or condescending to other people. There's no need for that, and it doesn't add to the conversation. One final question, and I was going to ask that anyway, from Amiga Nuts. When's the next book coming out, Dr. Josh?
Ooh.
Yeah, so I'm currently working on the second edition of the Old Testament. Did the Old Testament endorse slavery? And it's going to be. I've been talking to Pat Lowinger actually about this, and he's been saying maybe you shouldn't call it a revised edition. Maybe you should just call it like Volume 2, because I really am. It's going to more than double in length. But at a minimum, it's going to be the body, the 5 main chapters or 4 main chapters, I can't remember, are going to be greatly expanded. But then I have 4 major appendices that are going in this thing.
I'm so excited.
One of them is all of the laws and a lot of the major contracts or letters that deal with slavery from the ancient Near East, all the law collections. I've pulled them out. I've put them into the appendix and written commentary on each one and grouped them based on categories. So, for example, all the laws that deal with the battery of a slave, either slave as offender or slave as victim, and looking at all the different law collections, what happens when you do X or Y or Z to a slave physically, what are the penalties, and how does that make them make sense, and then how do they compare with what the biblical texts say? And so this is going to be something that if you're dealing with slavery and you want to see like, oh, okay, well, so like debt slaves, what are debt slaves like throughout the ancient Near East? There's going to be a section on debt service, laws about debt service in that appendix. So you'll just be able to go through and say, all right, what do the laws of Ornama say? What do the laws of Hammurabi say? What does the Bible say? So yeah, that should be coming out. I'm definitely by the end of the year.
Would I be wrong in inferring from previous comparisons between the law of Moses and the law of Hammurabi that the law of Hammurabi will be rather more generous in some points?
Yes. Not in all, but certainly in some. And this is the danger. Actually, I'll close with this. Close the question with this. This is from a book that's actually really hard to get a hold of now. But Levinson, it's Bernard Jackson. It's just a phenomenal. But there's this quote in here that I found, and I'm super excited to put it in. And let's see where. Oh, don't tell me I can't find it.
Sticky tabs are your friend.
Damn it. Yeah, here we go. There. Okay. He writes, there is, I think, a salutary lesson to be learned from this comparison. It is all too easy to allow apologetics. Now, this is like an A&E law, Hebrew Bible law scholar. Like he's the anti-apologetic stuff is just not what he does. He's got better things to do with his time.
Fair.
But it's too easy to allow apologetics to enter into the comparison of biblical with ancient Near Eastern law. Apologetics which take the form of showing the moral superiority of the biblical to the non-biblical collections. I do not, in this case, he's talked about one of the comparisons, attribute such motivation to the claim that the laws protecting the slave in Exodus refer to slavery in general, not specifically to debt slavery. That is a perfectly reasonable first reading of the text, even though in my view it turns out to be mistaken. But even if we do take the Exodus provisions as referring to slavery in general, the comparison does not lead in a single direction. Biblical law, making these assumptions, may give a protection to the permanent slave, which is absent from the ancient Near Eastern collections. But conversely, the protection from maltreatment accorded the debt slave is greater in Hammurabi than it is in the Bible. That latter comparison, we may note, is consistent with the shorter maximum period of service for a debt slave, which Hammurabi sets at 3 years as opposed to the biblical 6. So, in other words, he's noticing just in what he does, how biblical apologists will try to come at the text and be like, oh no, the Bible's so much better. The Bible's so much better. And he's like, yeah, but no, it's not.
It isn't. And
it isn't.
I've always tried to point out that the mythology of the 10 Commandments being carved into the stone takes from the Code of Hammurabi, which was actually carved in stone, which we actually possess, which was actually put in every city that was a major city, obviously, that was under the control of the Code of Hammurabi and all of the subsequent political implications of that. But ultimately, the Bible code is ripped off from better legal codes in many cases, and the attempt to
Just
make
the
it
Bible
better
code?
is desperate.
Ju-
No,
just-
not that Bible code, not the magic count 6
no,
letters.
I said
up
just
3 and then
just the Bible code. I think there's a lot more plagiarism in the Bible than just that. So, but
of
we have
course
to
there is.
we
But
have
if
to Lilith, we have to
people
wrap
want
up.
to know about the plagiarism, they have to go to the Bible study, because I try and cover as many forms of plagiarism as I can in the Bible, which granted, I can only do so much without totally taking over the show. So
That's
I do what I can.
That's every Saturday on Ross channel. We have to wrap up. Dr. Josh, other than
Yes.
you being on Jefferson Spatchcock's channel on Wednesday, it was 8 p.m. Eastern, right? Yes, 8 p.m. Eastern.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Anything else you want to tell the people where they can find you, what they need to go looking for, or did we leave anything out?
I mean, if no. I mean, if anybody's interested in ever getting any of my books, just go to Amazon and type in Joshua Bowen. You'll see them. But I always, in these moments, want to plug Megan, because in case anybody doesn't know, Megan was handpicked to be the host of Bart Ehrman's podcast, Misquoting Jesus. So if you
Nice.
have not seen the Misquoting Jesus podcast, like, I don't know what you're doing, but like, he selected her, and it's just the two of them on screen. She's amazing,
That is
and she
cool.
deserves every bit of it.
So loud.
Yeah, so go check it out, Misquoting Jesus podcast. She's badass.
Yes.
And
I
check
love
out
this with all
Jefferson's
my heart.
channel, because she's going to be on there with you.
That's right.
In a few days.
And see,
Okay.
now people will actually tune in, right? Because she'll be there.
Absolutely. No, I love you,
knows?
Dr. Josh. I love you. I love you and your wife and your beautiful marriage of the minds, and also everything else, because obviously 5 kids, life is complicated. But it deeply, it gives me hope on some level that I didn't know I was still capable of having hope, that a marriage of the minds like this, with everything else attached, obviously, could still exist. So it makes me so happy, just in my soul.
And I want to thank you, Dr. Josh, for DMing me on Twitter asking whether or not we could do this. I've been thinking of it for a long time, but I know how extremely busy you are, because we've had some conversations about you joining on Raw for the stream. So, and we're a tiny channel, so I don't always want to inflict on people's time. And if possible, I will divert to people who have a bigger audience than we have. But I'm so happy that you could come on our channel. I'm really Really grateful for that.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay,
Appreciate
so we will leave
for
with,
letting me nerd out.
our usual tiny commercial from a well-known Christian apologist. For other people, we might be back next week, maybe even with Dr. Josh, because we're still hashing out the day and time for the conversation with P-Town. On Wednesday, Jefferson Spatchcock's channel.
Oh, bless your heart.
Where Dr. Josh and Megan will be, and obviously Saturday and Sunday, you need to go to on Ross' channel to read the Bible or the Book of Mormon, whatever fancies your pleasure. So see you all next time. Bye, everyone.
Listen to this. Our visitors watched almost 18 million minutes of our videos on YouTube. I'm telling you, praise God. Can you imagine that? I want to say a big thank you to all of our YouTube subscribers and all of our partners. Now listen, if you have not subscribed to a YouTube channel, do it right now. Do it today. And all you have to do is click the big red subscribe button. Be sure to share our channel with your family and with friends, because it takes all of us working together to spread the word